Hi, I'm Casca Clinket artist Dean Heron, and today I'm going to show you the steps how to make a red cedar paddle. Oh hey, welcome back. So what I have here is a Western red cedar board that I got from a local mill, and we've already cut out and made our template that we're going to follow. We're just going to trace that onto our red cedar board here and get started. And before I start get going, I'd just like to introduce Matthias. He's my son, and he's going to be making his own red cedar paddle alongside with me. Okay. Okay, we moved out to the bandsaw now, and Matthias is going to gently cut the red cedar on the bandsaw. Okay, so you can see that Matthias has masterfully cut out the paddles on the bandsaw, and we're just laying them out on the carving table now. We're going to tack them down with a couple F clamps, and we're going to use the block planer or maybe a draw knife. A couple different methods on actually taking out the paddle blades themselves. So you can see also we've had Matthias put on the center line. It goes from tip to tip, and it goes all the way around the paddle itself. So we'll tack it on and then we'll do the next step. So what we're going to do with the handle side of the paddle is we're just going to score this area right here where the handle is going to go. And because what we're going to do is we're going to plane this section down a little bit more flat so that the handle comes out. We're just going to cut down to the line here, not quite halfway. We're just going to go just a little bit above it. And that way when you're using your draw knife to pull this out and flatten it, it actually has a stopping point, so it's not going to rip any of this material off. The material you want here is for your handle, and you want to keep that. So for right now, we're just going to score it, and then we can start working our way back to the handle. So you can see I've scored both sides, and what this allows me to do is actually bring this draw knife right to the back here, and rather than tearing off that material, it actually stops at the end there. And that way I can put the handle on afterwards. So you can see that we've tacked down our paddle to the carving table. I've just used a little bit of rubber matting and an F clamp to tack it down with. That way it's nice and sturdy. The top of the table's made from rubber as well, so it's not going to move on you when you're using the draw knife. So that's the tool that I'm going to start off with this paddle with, is a draw knife. And in its namesake, you're going to draw that knife towards you. So when you're working with this knife, you don't want to just use your arms, you want to use your whole body. You need your body weight to do the cut. And as well, when you're drawing it towards you, just angle the knife a little bit on a skew like this, and you'll find the cuts are a little bit easier to do. So when you're cutting, you get these nice curl pieces come off there of a sharp knife. And you're always just looking at the reference lines that you've made on the side there for yourselves. So when it comes to when your paddle starts changing shape, you'll see the grain. This is edge grain red cedar. So the grain's standing straight up like this. And what it's going to do when it starts turning a corner right here, if I were to use my draw knife and pull it this way, I'll rip into that grain. So what you want to do is you want to start right where the design of your paddle starts turning. That's where you can start doing your cut, and you'll find that it's nice and easy on that edge grain, and it comes off real quite nice and easy. So as Matthias just experienced, when we have a change in our edge grain right here, It's a little bit easier to work from the center line here and out when you're working on getting your blade cut. And what will happen if you're working right on the edge, it will happen just like what happened here with Matthias. He pulls out a little bit of the edge grain right here. This end grain's all exposed. So what will happen, your knife, when it goes into the wood, it's actually going to catch, and your knife's going to go on an angle like this. I'll just exaggerate it. Rather than going straight across, it's going to catch on that edge grain, and it's going to want to dig into it. And the tendency really at that point is to actually pull even harder, so you pull that piece off. But my recommendation at the point would just be to stop and take a look at it and reassess, and it's not really a big deal. Okay, so Matthias has moved out his paddle, so it's just off the edge of his table here. And what he's moved to as well, he's trying a different tool. He's going to use a block plane, and the block plane is set up so that it just takes nice thin strips of wood, and he'll pass it along the paddle now to do the other side.
Bread from Mickey Mouse. No?
Perfect. Micro thin. Okay, just keep an eye on where you're working down to. Looking good there, buddy.
Look at you tell which side the pro is working on.
Yeah, so we're getting down to just this little edge here. You can see my cut line across the back of the paddle end here, where the handle meets. And when you get to this point, sometimes when you're using the big knife like this, a big draw knife, it gets a little bit a little bit too heavy of a tool to pull, and you're pulling with all your weight for this to do a nice cut. And when you get to the end here, sometimes you'll pull up the edge, sometimes it'll just slip and it will pull all the way through. It's a good idea just to switch to some nice hand tools that are a bit smaller, like these bent knives that I have here. So this is just a slight bend knife. It's a little small detailed knife. It's really good for plating surfaces. And I also have this other finishing type of knife. And they're both good for getting into areas like this. You can just pull them towards you, and you'll see it's nice fine cuts. And it's a little bit easier to slow down and a little bit easier to cut when you get into these tight areas here. And when you're pulling them, I'm using two hands on this. You can do it with one hand if you wish, depending how comfortable you are with using bent knives. I use two hands just for a little bit more control, and we're just going to cut right up into that edge. So here we are. We've got everything else pretty much evened out on the rest of the paddle here, and the last portion that we need to do before we start sanding is putting the handle together. And with the handle, I'm going to change to a different type of tool. It's a skew, and it cuts really nice across this end grain. Because the way your handle sits on your paddle, there's quite a bit of end grain on either side of this cut piece. And what you want to do is go across the grain with it, with a skew. It cuts really nice, and it helps you in that grain part. So when you're pushing your skew right across, you want to just slow down when you get to the end. The tendency right now is just to actually push a little bit harder, and sometimes what will happen, you'll tear off that little end piece. I usually just switch around and come back this way, just on the end here, and that way I'm not taking any of the other stuff away or putting a chip into the end of the paddle. And then you just go across and you work your way right down to the blade of the paddle itself, and what we're doing is just rounding off basically all the edges on this square handle here right now. And once that's done, you'll have a nice round handle and you should be ready to sand after this. This process doesn't take too long, a few minutes each side, and it comes across really nicely. You can see some of the grains kind of lifting up here. The grain here is sticking up at an angle like this. So when I'm pushing it across, it's starting to lift it. So what I'll do here is I'll just come back and go the opposite direction. And that way I'm working with the grain. It's always easier to work with the grain than against the grain. So after a few slices, you'll have your handle finished.